A century of farming and logging have taken a toll on streams and rivers. Now, federal and state governments are spending tens of millions of dollars trying to undo the damage.
How much of this is a roll of the dice?
I would say it's a calculated risk, but it's a risk worth taking.
Well, tonight, Coin 6 looks at how well government biologists know what they're doing.
Yeah, Tan Tilken reveals some people who own the land around the creeks are actually really frustrated with the results and the cost. Dan, you've been looking into this for a while now.
And we've discovered that some are afraid to speak up, afraid to criticize the federal agencies responsible for these important rehabilitation programs and payments.
It's been planted with a variety of native species.
On farmland south of Hillsboro, Misty Siebold is taking us to a creek that is so small it doesn't have a name. Years of farming changed it.
It should meander, right?
Okay.
Naturally. So it's starting to rebuild its meanders.
Siebold is a forester for a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's her job to work with landowners to rehabilitate streams with native plants and trees to help water quality.
With the trees, they're also shading and cooling the temperatures back down for the fish.
So just a big mud hole.
Bob Stark owns the land around the creek where cows once roamed until the government helped pay to fence it off and plant. Is it what you thought it would be?
It's more. I'm very impressed.
But that's not always the case. So where the heck are we?
We are south of Heppner. We're about 60 miles south of the Columbia River.
We're in the middle of nowhere.
We're in the middle of nowhere.
Tom Macy is a former biologist at both the state and federal levels. He's now in private business. He's taken us to a place on the east side of the mountains in Morrow County, where the landowner is less than satisfied with his stream restoration project.
This is Jim Kirkpatrick.
Hey, Jim. You're more spry than I am. Jim Kirkpatrick owns 10,000 acres. He caters to hunters. This is your land, huh?
Yeah, this is it.
It's your piece of heaven.
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
It's been 7 years since Kirkpatrick hired a company to follow a Department of Agriculture approved plan.
Well, this was a $250,000 project.
Plants and trees were put all along the creek.
You know, they told me these aspen would be 20 feet by now. And I haven't found one that made it. There were hundreds of them planted. They kind of shook their head. They didn't know what caused this to fail, but then they really didn't acknowledge it truthfully. They came back and said, you know, they walked it a year later and said that there was, 40% success, and they were looking at weeds growing up in those pockets that had plants.
Kirkpatrick hired Macy to find a solution. Macy and Kirkpatrick think this black plastic ground cover is part of the problem.
This stuff is still buried. It's down there a foot. I can't pull it out. The only way you can get it out is with a shovel by hand, or you use a machine.
The plan called for installing the ground cover for a stretch of 2 miles to keep weeds down and moisture in the soil.
It didn't work. It seemed to cook the plants.
The Department of Agriculture says the material normally has a 3-year lifespan before breaking down. The manufacturer, Lumite, told me since it's still here after all these years, it's going to take at least another 5 years to break down. Kirkpatrick isn't the only landowner with a problem, but the only one we found willing to talk about concerns on camera. One shared this picture with us of their black ground cover with weeds growing instead of plants. The landowner called the project a total failure, adding, they're not angry, but disappointed it didn't work. Another told us, it's a good program, but needs to be rethought from farm to farm. I would not do it again because the overall expense of the end product was not worth it. Some landowners are concerned if they speak up, the government might stop the yearly payment the Farm Service sends to lease the land in the reclamation program. They're concerned the government may even ask to be paid back. Well, that's because part of the agreement puts the burden on the landowner to make sure the plan succeeds. So you rely on the landowner to keep this up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. This is their land. This is their project. Our job is to simply help them get going, get implemented, get it in the ground, and then from that point on, it's up to them.
That would include saving enough money from government payments to remove the black ground cover. The restoration effort is called the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. Since it began in 1998, the federal government has spent $108 million in Oregon. The state has kicked in another $20 million. More than 1,600 contracts have been signed with Oregon landowners, covering a combined 42,000 acres. That's nearly half the size of Portland. It's difficult to tell how many landowners are frustrated like Kirkpatrick.
Had it all worked out, it would have been a good value.
Well, that's because a privacy provision in federal law doesn't allow the Department of Agriculture to release contact information for people enrolled in the program. What we do know is projects are more difficult where there's less water.
You were saying that you could just as easily do a project on the east side that succeeds as you could do one that fails.
Absolutely. Again, you're dealing with a whole different climate over there.
The government has never done an in-depth study on the success rate of the program, partly because it takes years to see results. The state of Oregon is now launching its first study and is predicting results will be overwhelmingly positive, like seen here.
We need clean water. Animals need clean water, and from my mind, it's money well spent. It's a risk worth taking.
Now, biologist Tom Macy thinks there are better, more environmentally friendly ways to do these projects, like using bark chips instead of that black plastic ground cover. Now, he filed a whistleblower claim with the USDA. They recently rejected it.
Well, so Tom Macy suggested bark chips, but then why aren't his techniques being used?
The federal government says you can use bark chips, but that's more expensive than the black plastic, and so landowners usually go with the black plastic. And now these landowners say it's actually costing me more in the long run.
Yeah.
So Macy is arguing you should never give this as an option.
Always comes down to money, doesn't it?
Yeah. When we come back, we'll update the presidential visit here to Portland. President Obama has arrived in downtown. You saw that live just minutes ago. We'll be right back.